The sun hovered low over the jagged peaks of the Rockies, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and red. Below, Flight 742, a chartered turboprop bound from Denver to Aspen, was caught in a sudden downdraft. Inside the cabin, panic rippled through the passengers as the aircraft shuddered violently. The windshield fractured, showering the cockpit with a web of spider-like cracks. "Mayday! Mayday!" Captain Laura Mitchell cried into the mic, her voice calm but urgent. Ground controllers scrambled for clear sky. Viewers across the nation watched live on FlightWatch, a 24-hour cable network renowned for broadcasting real-time aerial traffic. On screen, two camera feeds split the frame. One pointed forward into the cockpit, the other trained on the ridge where smoke plumed from the mangled fuselage. At home, families held their breath. In one living room, 7-year-old Mia clutched her teddy bear as her father gripped the armrest of his recliner. Inside the plane, flight attendant Marcus Reyes hustled down the aisle, securing loose luggage and calming terrified passengers. "Brace for impact! Heads down, cover your faces!" he shouted. Metals groaned as the aircraft struck a rocky outcrop, then skidded down the slope, tearing trees from their roots. Sparks flew. When the plane finally came to rest, the world outside fell silent, save for groans and distant cries. Marcus's heart pounded in his ears as he flicked on his portable radio. "Mayday confirmed. We're down," he reported, voice trembling. Seconds later, the live broadcast cut to the anchor team in the studio. "We have word that Flight 742 has gone off radar near Breckenridge," the anchor announced, leaning forward. "Rescue crews are en route. We'll go to live images from the scene." On the mountainside, helicopters descended like giant metallic birds. Spotlight beams cleaved through the twilight haze. A stretcher was lowered to the wreck, and medics hurried to secure injured passengers. The camera followed every movement, capturing the urgency and raw emotion. Among the injured was MayaChen, a young paramedic on her way home from a conference. Her right leg was pinned beneath a twisted seat. Shaking, she pressed her hand against the bleeding wound, trying to staunch the flow. Through blurred vision, she saw Marcus kneeling beside her. "Hang in there," he whispered. "You're going to be okay." Rescue teams lifted Maya onto the stretcher. Her eyes fluttered open as she was hoisted upward toward the helicopter's open hatch. The camera zoomed in on her face, pale, sweat-glazed, but determined. Reporters in the studio cheered softly, praising the bravery of first responders. People across America exhaled in relief. As the stretcher passed out of the frame, Maya's lips moved. Her voice was barely audible over rotor noise, but she spoke 4 words that would haunt her forever. "Promise me I live." The live feed flew back to the studio. The anchors, brimming with emotion, offered words of consolation. But when the helicopter cleared the ridge and the feed cut to commercials, no one on national television repeated Maya's plea. In a small hospital ward hours later, Maya awoke to the dull ache of pain and the cold bite of regret. No one had heard her. No one had shown what she'd said. Outside her window, the early morning light crept over the peaks. A new day had begun, one in which Maya's story, her unheard words, would take on a life of their own. Dawn's pale light filtered through the pale green curtains of Breckenridge Regional Hospital, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. MayaChen lay motionless in her narrow bed, the steady beep of the heart monitor echoing the steady rise and fall of her chest. Outside, the Rockies stood silent and unreadable, their snow-capped peaks gleaming in the early morning sun, a stark contrast to the chaos that had claimed her just hours before. Her mind drifted back to the instant of impact, the sickening crunch of metal against stone, the world tilting on its axis. She could still feel the weight of that twisted seat pressing into her leg, the searing pain that had reduced her to a trembling wreck. But what haunted her most was the memory of those final moments beneath the wreckage. The slow, calculated way Marcus Reyes had pried the metal away, exposing shards that glinted like malicious teeth in the fading light. She blinked as the door creaked open. A nurse in a crisp white uniform entered, clipboard in hand. "Good morning, Ms. Chen," she said softly. "How are you feeling?" Maya tried to speak, but her throat burned. She remembered her plea, those 4 words she'd gasped out as the stretcher swung beneath the helicopter blades. "Promise me I live." The nurse checked her IV line, adjusted the blankets, and offered a sympathetic smile. "You've been through a lot," she murmured. "The pilot used every last ounce of skill to keep you alive. You're a survivor." Survivor. The word settled heavily on Maya's chest, like an anchor. She longed to tell this kind stranger about the voice inside her that still whispered fear, that maybe, just maybe, the world had already forgotten those final words, the ones no one had heard. Hospital corridors hummed with activity, footsteps, murmured conversations, the soft whir of rolling carts. Through the frosted glass window across the hall, Maya caught a glimpse of a uniformed police officer speaking with Flight Watch reporters clustered on the sidewalk. Clips of the crash replayed in her mind's eye, RPM gauges spinning, flight controls jerking, and that fleeting moment when the turboprop seemed to hang suspended in midair. A knot of dread formed in her stomach. She wondered if the network had edited out her plea, her desperate command that someone out there, somewhere, acknowledge her will to live. What if her voice, her very humanity, had been stripped away for the sake of sensational footage? The realization stung sharper than any physical wound. Hours later, Marcus Reyes arrived in the ICU hallway, carrying a battered duffel bag and wearing the exhaustion of a man who had stared into death and lived to tell the tale. He paused at her doorway, staring through the glass with a mix of relief and apprehension. Maya's eyes fluttered open as he approached, his features softening into a gentle grin. "Hey, hero," Marcus joked, though his voice cracked with emotion. He took her hand, the one uninjured, and squeezed it. "You gave us quite the scare." Maya managed a weak smile. "You saved my life," she whispered, voice barely above a breath. "Thank you." He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting someone, perhaps a camera crew, to materialize. The network. They're running non-stop coverage. They focused on the pilot's split-second decision to bank left, on the rescue team's heroics. "But your voice, I don't think they aired it." His gaze dropped. "I was there, I heard you, but the directors cut it out. They think your words are too raw, too personal." Anger and grief welled up in Maya's chest. She felt diminished by their omission, as though her humanity had been edited out of her own story. "They turned me into footage," she said, voice trembling, "a piece of drama to fill airtime." Marcus shook his head. "No, you're more than that, and I'm going to make sure the world hears you. Promise me you'll let me help?" Maya's throat tightened. She wanted to scream at the injustice, to demand her voice be heard in its full, unfiltered truth, but her injuries reminded her how fragile she was. Instead, she nodded. "Promise," she rasped, repeating her own words back to herself. Down the hall, a camera crew packed up their equipment, oblivious to the human drama unfolding just beyond the sliding doors. But Maya and Marcus knew their story was far from over. The survivors of Flight 742 would not be silenced. They would reclaim their narrative, beginning with that stolen moment on the stretcher, when a single plea had dared the world to acknowledge life amidst devastation. And somewhere, out there, millions of viewers were waiting to hear the truth. Night fell over Breckenridge as the hospital's fluorescent corridors dimmed to a muted hum. Outside, snow began to drift in lazy spirals, blanketing the mountain town in crystalline silence. Inside room 312, MayaChen lay propped against pillows, her leg encased in a rigid brace. The soft click of the nurse's station overhead was the only sound, aside from her own ragged breathing. In her lap rested a battered notebook Marcus had pressed into her hand earlier, a lifeline of sorts. Its pages were filled with field notes from Maya's career as a paramedic, vital sign charts, medication dosages, procedural checklists. Now the blank pages at the end of the book taunted her, begging to be filled with her story. She flipped to the first empty sheet and drew a deep breath. Words flowed in shaky loops. I was alive when they left me on that stretcher. I spoke, I demanded I live. But they didn't hear me. They chose silence over my truth. Her pen scratched like a heartbeat against the paper. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. The door cracked open and Marcus stepped inside, his uniform neatly pressed despite the hours he'd spent on call. His eyes, dark and earnest, flicked to the notebook. "Working on something?" he asked, voice low. Maya closed the book. "I'm trying to write down what happened," she said. "Not just the crash and rescue, but everything after. The moments no one saw. The things I wish I'd said differently." Her fingers traced a faint scar near her temple, a souvenir from the crash. "I want to reclaim my story." Marcus crossed to her bedside and took the chair she'd pointed to earlier. "I'll help you," he offered. "Let me type up your notes on my laptop. We can start a blog or even pitch an interview directly to FlightWatch. If they won't air your plea, we'll find another stage." Maya nodded, relief washing over her. "I don't want pity," she said. "I just want honesty. People need to understand that in an instant, everything can change. And when it does, your voice, your real voice, matters." Outside the window, the helicopter's landing pad glowed like a beacon. Crews ferried equipment and supplies between the hospital and the crash site, preparing for the formal investigation set to begin at first light. Maya watched the doting glow shift, thinking of the metal beams and charred seats still scattered across the mountain slope like fallen soldiers. Hours earlier, she'd overheard fragments of conversation through the door. A black-clad investigator discussing pilot error with a clipboard under his arm. A TV crew leader arguing with security over camera angles. They treated the disaster like a puzzle to be solved, a drama to be repackaged. But for Maya and the others who had breathed their last under the fuselage, it was a crucible of fear, hope, and raw survival. She opened her notebook again and began to list the moments she feared would be lost. The calm before the storm, passengers joking about ski gear, cabin lights flickering as turbulence built, the instant of impact, the way the plane's belly scraped the rock face, the roar of tearing metal, the hush after the crash, when all sound froze except for distant cries, the plea on the stretcher, "Promise me I live," the unspoken erasure, how the network cut away, leaving her words unsaid. The aftermath, the hospital's antiseptic corridors, the reporters' cameras, and her own fight to be heard. As midnight approached, Marcus typed furiously, the glow of the laptop illuminating his focused expression. Maya read aloud, fine-tuning each sentence until it resonated with the cadence of her memory. At last he leaned back. "It's done," he said softly. 1,200 words, raw, unfiltered. "We can post this tonight." The glow of Maya's phone screen pulsed in the dim hospital room as notifications tumbled in. Comments, shares, retweets. Marcus hovered beside her bed, eyes fixed on the torrent of messages rolling across his laptop. What had started as a simple blog post had ignited an online firestorm. Within minutes of hitting publish, Maya's unfiltered account of the crash and her unheard plea had been shared by survival networks, aviation forums, and dozens of news blogs unwilling to sanitize her words. The hashtag #PromiseMeILive trended nationwide. Screen captures of the moment her lips moved on the stretcher spread across social media like wildfire. Maya read aloud a message from a fellow survivor, Thomas Avery, whose wife had perished in the accident. "Your courage gave me strength to keep fighting back when the pain was too much. Thank you for speaking up." Tears welled in her eyes as she scrolled further. Some replies were angry, criticism aimed at FlightWatch for silencing her. Others were sympathetic, testimonies of people who'd fought for their lives against impossible odds. Marcus exhaled slowly. "They're listening," he said. "Look at this." a petition demanding FlightWatch air the full unedited rescue footage. Tens of thousands have signed already. Maya smiled faintly, heart pounding. I never imagined this. Outside the window, snow muffled the world, the Rockies transformed into a silent white cathedral. Inside, the hospital pulsed with a different energy, one of collective outrage and solidarity. Over the next hours, Maya and Marcus fielded interview requests via email and phone. Independent podcasts, national talk shows, even the morning news. Each invitation brought a fresh wave of adrenaline and dread. To speak her truth again, this time on camera, meant reliving every moment of terror and hope. By late afternoon, the petition had reached 150,000 signatures. A media relations representative from FlightWatch contacted Marcus directly. We acknowledge the public's interest in the full rescue footage. However, for legal and privacy reasons, we cannot rebroadcast the audio component. We will consider releasing a transcript. The sterile message felt like a betrayal. Maya set her jaw. A transcript won't capture the urgency in my voice, she murmured. That's exactly it, Marcus agreed. They want to silence your tone, your desperation. Elaine Foster, an aviation psychologist who had counseled crash survivors for decades, leaned into the camera. Restoring the unedited record is crucial, she said. The peak end rule tells us that traumatic events are remembered most at their climax. Maya's plea is that climax. Without it, the narrative is incomplete. Across the screen, families of both survivors and victims nodded in solemn agreement. They shared stories of fragmented memories, how clips edited for prime time had erased their own voices, their own grief. Maya closed her eyes, absorbing the weight of their collective grief and hope. She thought of the families still waiting for closure, of the first responders racing against time, of the countless viewers who saw only sanitized drama instead of unvarnished humanity. When the call ended, Marcus shut his laptop and turned to Maya. You ready for this? He asked gently. Tomorrow morning's live interview with Skyline News is your chance to demand that footage. Maya took a steadying breath. The past 2 days surging back in a tidal wave, the roar of the crash, the scrape of metal, the blood and the darkness, and the moment she cried out that one plea. I'm ready, she said, voice firm, for everyone who couldn't speak, for every voice that's been silenced. Down the hall, a final nurse made her rounds. Outside, snow squalls spun around the mountain peaks. Inside, Maya's narrative had taken on its own momentum, carving new paths through media and memory. As she settled into sleep that night, the words echoed in her mind. Promise me I live, transformed from a personal plea into a universal rallying cry. The pre-dawn chill clung to the hospital windows as Maya sat in a folding chair beside a small conference table, rehearsing her lines by the glow of her smartphone. Outside, the Rockies slumbered under a thick blanket of snow. Inside, her nerves buzzed like a live wire. Today would be the first time she stepped in front of a camera since the crash, this time not as a passive subject of someone else's story, but as the author of her own. By 7:15 a.m., the Skyline news crew had assembled in room 210, their equipment humming softly. Overhead lights popped on, illuminating Maya in harsh midday clarity long before the sun had risen. A female reporter with a sympathetic smile introduced herself as Claire Jennings, and her cameraman adjusted focus until Maya's face filled the frame. Good morning, Maya, Claire began, flipping open a reporter's notebook. Thank you for speaking with us today. Let's start with what motivated you to speak out so forcefully after Flight 742's crash. Maya inhaled steadily, settling her hands in her lap. I realized that what happened on that mountain, what I lived through, wasn't just another breaking news segment, she said. Her voice was calm but resolute. It was a human story, raw and unedited. When I asked, "Promise me I live," I wasn't tweeting for attention. I was pleading for acknowledgement that a life hanging by a thread still matters, that our words carry weight even when chaos rages around us. Claire nodded, pen poised. Some viewers have criticized you for making the crash about yourself. How do you respond to that? Maya paused. I'm not trying to make this about me. I'm trying to make it about all of us. Every person who's ever had their voice drowned out by the roar of spectacle. When a network chooses which moments to broadcast and which to silence, they shape the collective memory. I want people to remember the full truth, not just the parts that fit neatly into a soundbite. The cameraman signaled that they were rolling live in 10 seconds. Claire glanced off camera before resuming direct to camera. To viewers at home, what do you want them to take away from your story? Maya looked straight into the lens. That every human life is a story worth telling, in full. That real courage exists in the spaces between wreckage and rescue, in the desperate words spoken when hope is hanging by a thread. If one person hears me and feels seen, feels validated in their own struggle, then my voice has done its job. The red "Live" indicator flashed on. Across the nation, dawn broadcasts momentarily paused their squawk boxes to air Maya's appeal. Hundreds of thousands tuned in, drawn by the trending hashtag and the rising petition. When the segment ended, the Skyline crew slipped out quietly, leaving Maya in the hush of the hospital room. Her phone buzzed with incoming messages. Congratulations, solidarity, renewed calls to push FlightWatch for complete footage. Just as she exhaled, her door swung open. A sharply dressed woman entered, flanked by two stern lawyers. Ms. Chen, the woman said, voice clipped, I'm Simone Redding with Morrow and Ballard. We represent FlightWatch. We'd like to discuss a potential settlement regarding unauthorized use of your image and voice. Maya's heart stuttered. Settlement, she echoed, wary. Simone offered a thin smile. We understand your concerns about how the network handled the footage. Our clients would like to negotiate your cooperation in delivering a statement to the families and viewers. Marcus appeared in the doorway, having heard raised voices. He placed himself between Maya and the lawyers. She has a right to control her story, he said evenly. Any agreement must honor her demand that the full audio and video be released, no redactions. Simone's eyes narrowed. We'll discuss terms, she said, before exiting with her team. As the door clicked shut, Maya sank into her chair. The possibility of legal wrangling loomed large, but so did the chance to transform an unjust erasure into a binding acknowledgement of her humanity. That afternoon, Maya rested while Marcus arranged a conference call with aviation attorneys and media rights advocates. They debated strategy, whether to pursue litigation to compel FlightWatch to release the unedited rescue feed or to escalate public pressure until the network capitulated. Each option carried risks. Court battles could drag on for months, while waiting for social momentum risked the story fading from public attention. By evening, they reached a plan. File a notice of intent to sue under federal media law while simultaneously staging a live virtual panel with survivors, families, and industry experts. The panel would replay Maya's plea over a secure link, ensuring an irrepressible record. That night, Maya reflected on the path ahead. The glare of camera lights, the thrust of legal clauses, the swirl of public opinion. It was dizzying. Yet beneath it all lay a simple truth. She had spoken when her life depended on it, and she would not be silenced now that she was safe. As the moon rose over the Rockies, Maya closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "Promise me I live," not as a plea, but as a declaration. Morning light filtered through the blinds of Maya's hospital room as she sat at the foot of her bed, laptop open on her lap. The virtual panel was scheduled to begin in 30 minutes. An unprecedented gathering of survivors, family members of victims, aviation experts, and media rights advocates. After days of planning, this digital forum represented the culmination of their strategic dual approach: legal pressure on FlightWatch paired with a public data dump that would bypass traditional broadcasters entirely. Marcus entered, coffee in hand, and settled into the chair beside her. "Ready?" he asked, offering a reassuring smile. Maya took a deep breath, gathering her resolve. "As I'll ever be." On screen, a dozen faces flickered into view. Thomas Avery, the survivor whose wife had died, Dr. Elaine Foster, the aviation psychologist, Simone Park, a tech entrepreneur whose husband had been aboard Flight 742, and Kevin Marshall, a First Amendment lawyer specializing in media law. Each participant carried the weight of their own losses and their own hopes for justice. Claire Jennings, the Skyline news reporter, moderated the session. "Thank you all for joining this historic panel," she began. "We're here to listen, to learn, and, above all, to preserve the unedited record of Flight 742's rescue." Thomas Avery spoke first. His voice cracked with emotion as he described the hollow ache of watching sanitized clips of the aftermath, the way the network's edit had excised not only Maya's plea, but also the raw cries of other survivors. "We lost loved ones that day," he said, "but we didn't lose our right to bear witness. That right belongs to every family, every viewer, every human being." Next, Dr. Foster offered clinical context. "Memory consolidation after trauma is notoriously selective," she explained. "When authorities only release fragmented footage, they inadvertently shape collective memory, often to the detriment of survivors. Hearing Maya's voice in its original context is essential for an authentic narrative." Simone Park detailed her husband's last phone call from the plane, a brief, static-filled message that ended mid-sentence. "He was terrified, but he wanted us to know he loved us," she said, tears shining in her eyes. The network aired the part where he said goodbye, but they cut away before the final words. "It felt like someone was controlling his last message to the world." Kevin Marshall then outlined the legal framework. Under the Federal Communications Act, any broadcast deemed newsworthy must still respect copyright and privacy. But networks cannot arbitrarily censor content that belongs to the public domain, he said. FlightWatch's refusal to rebroadcast the unedited rescue feed infringes on the public's right to a complete and accurate news record. "We will file a motion for injunctive relief today." As the lawyers exchanged notes in a private sidebar, the focus returned to Maya. Claire turned to her. "Maya, would you please share the clip of your plea now?" Maya nodded and clicked on a secure video link. The panel watched in collective silence as the grainy footage of Maya on the stretcher appeared. The whirling rotor blades filled the soundscape, and then, just as the camera's focus sharpened on her face, Maya's voice rang out, "Promise me I live." The words hung in the air, raw and vulnerable, before the video cut abruptly to the helicopter's side view. A hush settled over the virtual room. Claire's voice trembled as she spoke. That was the moment FlightWatch erased from their public footage. Simone Park leaned forward, reaching for her tissues. Hearing those words again, it changes everything. On Twitter and Facebook, viewers tuned in en masse. The hashtag #YourPromiseMeILive resurfaced, trending within minutes. Comments poured in. Astonishment that such a pivotal moment had been hidden. Outrage at the network's censorship, gratitude to Maya for reclaiming her story. As the panel concluded, Kevin Marshall announced their next steps. "We will file our motion within 24 hours and seek a temporary restraining order to compel FlightWatch to preserve and potentially rebroadcast the full rescue feed. Simultaneously, we've archived this video of Maya's plea on multiple public servers. Even if FlightWatch refuses, the record cannot be erased." Maya felt a surge of relief and apprehension. The legal battle loomed large, but she was no longer alone. Hundreds of thousands of voices now bore witness alongside her. The digital archive ensured that her plea would outlive any corporate decision. Later that afternoon, Maya closed her laptop and leaned back against her pillows. Marcus offered her a plate of soup, and they shared a quiet meal. Outside, snowflakes tumbled past the window, gentle and persistent, like hope itself. "Whatever happens next," Marcus said, "you've already won something bigger than any court order. You've given people permission to speak their truth." Maya nodded, feeling the weight of fatigue settle into her bones. "I spoke to live," she whispered. "Now I'll promise myself to keep fighting so that every voice, no matter how fragile, can be heard." As dusk fell over Breckenridge, the world beyond the mountains buzzed with renewed energy. Maya's story had broken free of the stretcher rails and helicopter blades. It had become a testament to the power of unedited truth. And in that truth lay the promise of life, her own, and countless others who dared to speak when it mattered most. A week later, the tension in the federal courthouse in Denver was palpable. The marble floors gleamed under chandelier light, and the air carried the faint scent of polished wood and anticipation. MayaChen sat at the plaintiff's table, her left leg still braced, but her posture unbowed. Marcus Reyes leaned close, offering a reassuring squeeze of her hand before settling into his seat. Across the aisle, a team of Flight Watch attorneys, led by the poised Simone Redding, flipped through thick binders, their expressions polite but guarded. At 10:30 a.m., Judge Herman Caldwell entered, donning robes that swished softly as he took his seat. The courtroom fell silent. Maya felt her pulse quicken as her own attorneys rose to present their case for an injunction compelling Flight Watch to preserve and rebroadcast the unedited rescue feed of Flight 742. "Your Honor," began Kevin Marshall, his gravelly voice resonating clearly. "The unedited footage, including Ms. Chen's plea, 'Promise me I live,' is a vital public record. Flight Watch's selective airing constitutes an impermissible alteration of a historical event, one that actively undermines the public's right to a complete and accurate news account." He paused, letting the weight of that assertion settle. "We seek a temporary restraining order to preserve the footage in its original form and to compel its broadcast to the American public." Judge Caldwell inclined his head. "Ms. Redding, your response." Simone Redding stood, heels clicking on the floor. "Your Honor, Flight Watch acted within its editorial discretion. The footage in question contains a private utterance made under duress, which implicates both privacy interests and potential liability concerns. We have offered to provide a transcript and a redacted version that omits only private medical details. A full rebroadcast would contravene network policy and possibly federal privacy statutes." As she spoke, Maya's gaze flicked to the gallery, where survivors and victims' families, some still recovering in wheelchairs, others wearing fatigue and grief-like armor, watched with solemn intensity. When Simone finished, the courtroom stenographer tapped her instrument, the only sound for a heartbeat. Judge Caldwell leaned forward. "Ms. Chen, if I may ask, why is full rebroadcast necessary, and what distinguishes this moment from any other in the rescue operation?" Maya's throat tightened, but she met the judge's eyes. "Your Honor, that 4-second plea, 'Promise me I live,' was spoken at the very edge of life and death. It crystallized the human will to survive. To restore that moment is not sensationalism, it's a matter of historical integrity and empathetic connection. The public has the right to witness the raw, unfiltered truth of what happened on that mountain slope." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Marcus squeezed her hand gently, proud and steady. After closing arguments, Judge Caldwell excused both parties for a brief recess. Maya slipped outside to join a small contingent of supporters on the courthouse steps. Reporters from local stations hovered with microphones and cameras, but it was the faces of ordinary citizens, many wearing "Promise Me I Live" pins, that struck her most. One teenager, clutching a sign that read "My Voice Matters," waved shyly as Maya passed. Back inside, the lawyer for the Department of Transportation, called as a friend of the court, outlined guidelines for preserving investigative materials. Though they stopped short of demanding broadcast, they emphasized the importance of unaltered emergency recordings in future safety improvements. That weighed in Maya's favor. At 2:30 p.m., Judge Caldwell returned, gaveling the room to order. He announced that the court would grant a temporary restraining order. FlightWatch must preserve the unedited rescue feed and work with plaintiffs to determine an appropriate method of public release by the following Friday. While he declined to mandate a live rebroadcast immediately, citing need for further briefing on privacy law, the ruling marked a significant victory for Maya and everyone who had fought to reclaim that four-word plea. Outside the courtroom, Marcus lifted Maya into a celebratory hug. Cameras flashed and reporters clamored for sound bites. Maya looked out over the crowd and raised her voice. "This isn't just my win," she shouted, voice firm despite the lingering pain in her leg. "It's a victory for every person whose story has been edited, silenced, or reshaped without their consent. History belongs to us all." That evening, back in her hospital room, Maya reflected on the day's whirlwind through the haze of painkillers and fatigue. Scrolls of news articles, blog posts, and social media feeds lay open on her laptop. Editorials hailed the ruling as a landmark for media transparency. Survivors shared stories of finding strength in her courage. Legal analysts debated the broader implications for news ethics. Marcus read aloud a tweet by a prominent media critic. "MayaChen's fight reminds us that editing isn't just a technical process, it's a moral act. We owe her, and our own conscience, the full story." Maya smiled, tears pricking her eyes. "We've pushed them this far," she said softly. "Now we have to see it through." Marcus nodded. "Friday will be here before you know it." Outside the window, the Rockies stood in silent vigil under a blanket of stars. Inside, Maya felt the quiet hum of history in motion. Her plea, uttered in fear and hope, had transcended the stretcher, the cameras, and the cutting room floor. It had become a rallying cry for integrity, compassion, and the right to be heard. As she drifted towards sleep, she whispered once more to the night, "I live." It was Thursday evening, one day shy of the court's Friday deadline. Outside her window, Breckenridge's snow-dusted pines swayed under a chill wind that promised another storm. Inside, anticipation crackled through the makeshift war room Marcus had set up on her bedside table. Laptops sat open in a semicircle, one displaying the unedited rescue footage in stalled rotation, another streaming the live petition count, now nearing 500,000 signatures, and a third with an email draft to FlightWatch's counsel. Maya rubbed her temples, eyes heavy from rewriting that email for the 20th time. A soft knock at the door heralded Dr. Elaine Foster's arrival. The aviation psychologist carried a steaming mug of chamomile tea and a folder bulging with printed articles. "I thought you might need a refill," she said, settling into the chair beside Maya. "Thank you," Maya murmured, accepting the mug. The warmth seeped into her fingers. "How are things on your end?" Dr. Foster tapped the folder. "I've compiled testimonials from survivors of past crashes where unedited recordings made a difference, not only legally, but therapeutically. These may bolster our argument that public playback serves both public interest and emotional healing." She opened the folder to reveal accounts of families finding solace in hearing every word their loved ones spoke. Maya leaned forward, scanning the pages. One story detailed how survivors of Flight 108 in Alaska had rallied for the release of cockpit voice recordings, later credited with design changes that improved emergency exit systems. Another recounted families of Flight 365 in Florida, who, despite the tragedy, found comfort in the unabridged audio of post-crash communication with rescuers. "These are powerful," Maya whispered, tracing the lines with her eyes. "We can attach these as exhibits to our filings tomorrow." Dr. Foster nodded. "Exactly. It shows that the unedited record isn't voyeurism. It's a catalyst for systemic improvements and collective closure." Marcus re-entered, carrying a stack of printouts. "Just got off the phone with Kevin Marshall. He's updated the motion with these exhibits and will file first thing in the morning. He also scheduled a media embargo for Friday's release of the court's directives, so we'll control the narrative." Maya exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. That's good. I want the public to hear the court's findings in our words, not through some dry press release. Marcus spread the printouts across the table. A draft of their joint statement, bullet points for talking heads, and a step-by-step timeline for Friday's release. Here's our plan, he said. At 9 a.m., we live-stream the court's order, along with the unedited footage. 30 seconds before the official FlightWatch website mirrors it. Then we go into a moderated Q&A with survivors and experts. Maya nodded, drinking her tea in small, steady sips. I want to start by saying thank you to everyone who stood by us, who refused to let my words vanish. Dr. Foster added, then we'll segue into the broader context, how releasing the footage can prevent future tragedies by informing policy. The three of them leaned in, refining each paragraph, each transition, until the digital clock on the wall blinked past midnight. Finally, Maya pressed her lips together and stretched her arms. That's enough for now. I should get some rest. Marcus helped her recline into the comfort of her pillows. Dr. Foster rose to leave, offering a comforting smile. Sleep well, Maya. Tomorrow we make history. Alone in the dimly lit room, Maya closed her eyes, the hum of anticipation fading into a steady pulse. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window panes like distant applause. She thought of the mountain crash, of the desperate plea cast into the roar of helicopter blades, and of the countless voices that might now be heard because she refused to stay silent. As she drifted towards sleep, she found herself repeating the words that had become both burden and beacon. I live. Friday dawned clear and bitterly cold, the sun rising over Breckenridge in a blaze of pale gold that turned the snow to glittering crystals. Inside MayaChen's hospital room, the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Monitors beeped softly against the quiet hum of the heating system. Cables snaked across the floor, and tripods bearing cameras and microphones stood sentinel around her bed. Marcus Reyes adjusted the final cable, checking angles, while Dr. Elaine Foster reviewed her notes one last time. At precisely 08:55 a.m., Claire Jennings appeared on the small studio monitor mounted by Maya's window, her face calm and professional. We're live in 5 minutes, Claire intoned. Signal checks are green. Petition count stands at 542,173 signatures. The court order is ready for release at exactly 09:00. Maya took a slow, steadying breath. Her leg throbbed faintly, an almost welcome reminder of how far she'd come. She straightened in her bed, adjusting the blankets so that her laptop sat comfortably on her lap. On its screen, a private web page displayed the scanned court order, red-stamped and bearing Judge Caldwell's seal. A second window cued the unedited rescue footage, poised to play at her cue. At 08:59:50, Claire's voice crackled through the speaker. 10 seconds to go. Maya's heart hammered against her ribcage as she counted down under her breath. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. At 09, her cage drew sharp. Marcus pressed enter, and the live stream feed flickered from a waiting slate bearing the PromiseMeILive logo to a crisp display of the judge's handwritten order. Claire's voice echoed over the feed. Good morning, America. At 9 a.m. Mountain Time, the United States District Court for the District of Colorado issued a temporary restraining order in the case of Chen versus FlightWatch Network. The order mandates the preservation and timely public release of unedited rescue footage from Flight 7422, including all audio and video components. We now turn to the footage itself. The screen shifted seamlessly to the grainy handheld camera shot taken from the helicopter's side door. For a breathless moment, it hovered on the rock-strewn slope where Flight 742's mangled fuselage lay half-buried in snow. Then the camera panned upward to MayaChen, wearing a blood-smeared hospital gown and strapped to a stretcher, her face framed by the whipping wind and the churning blades. And there, unsilenced for the first time on national airwaves, was her voice. "Promise me I live," she whispered, the words crystal clear despite the roar of the rotors. The camera held on her determined gaze as the rescuers secured her to the stretcher and prepared to send her skyward. The moment stretched into eternity, capturing the tension between life and death, the fragility of hope and the indomitable will to survive. The feed continued in unbroken continuity through the entire rescue sequence, Maya's eyes fluttering closed as she was lifted. The thump of landing gear against the makeshift helipad, the rush of paramedics greeting her at the hospital entrance. Not once did the stream cut away. Viewers at home sat enraptured, many wiping tears from their cheeks. Across social media, the live replay was shared, retweeted, and embedded on news sites, each embed carrying an unaltered copy of that pivotal four-word plea. At 09:05, Claire's voice returned. This concludes the court-mandated release of Flight 742's unedited rescue footage. We honor this moment of truth and the bravery of all who risked their lives to save others. For those just joining us, please watch in its entirety. Your understanding of what truly happened depends on it. Maya exhaled, chest tight with relief. Around her, the small crew exchanged quiet cheers. Marcus leaned in, pressing a hand to her shoulder. "You did it," he whispered. "You really did it." But Maya shook her head slightly, tears glinting in her eyes. "We did it," she corrected. "All of us." In the hours that followed, the impact of the livestream reverberated across the nation. News programs replayed the feed in prime time without edits. Talk show hosts invited Maya and Marcus to share their perspectives. Petitions grew beyond 1 million signatures, pushing FlightWatch to issue a formal apology and pledge an internal review of editorial policies. Aviation regulators cited the unedited footage in drafting new guidelines for live broadcast rescue operations. By nightfall, Maya lay back against her pillows, exhaustion tugging at her eyelids like a gentle tide. Dr. Foster slipped in beside her, notebook closed. "You changed the rules of the game," she murmured. Maya nodded, a tired smile curving her lips. "All I did was speak. But sometimes that's enough to rewrite history." Outside, the Rockies stood dark against the star-spangled sky, silent witnesses to a new chapter in media integrity and human resilience. And within Maya's quiet hospital room, the echo of 4 simple words, "Promise me I live," lingered like a benediction, a testament to the power of unfiltered truth. 2 weeks later, the world outside Breckenridge Regional Hospital had lost none of its wintry magic. Snowdrifts carpeted the pines, and icicles dripped like crystal daggers from the eaves. Inside room 312, however, MayaChen's world had expanded far beyond these walls. Her recovery had progressed steadily. Physical therapy sessions twice a day, daily video calls with her family in Seattle, and a near-constant stream of email inquiries from journalists, advocates, and survivors around the globe. This morning, Maya sat upright in bed as Marcus Reyes wheeled in a laptop on a small cart. The screen displayed the launch page for Voices Uncut, the non-profit podcast they'd created in collaboration with survivors' families and aviation safety experts. The first episode, airing live in an hour, would feature Maya retelling her story in full, alongside audio clips from rescue tapes that FlightWatch had agreed to share under the court order. "Ready for takeoff?" Marcus teased, propping the laptop before her. Maya grinned, flexing her fingers. "More than ever. Let's make sure these voices never get silenced again." She clicked, "Join Live," and the interface populated with little profile icons, hundreds of listeners already waiting. A countdown clock ticked to 0, and the on-air indicator glowed red. "Welcome," Maya began, voice warm and steady. "You're listening to Voices Uncut, where survivors, first responders, and families share unfiltered stories of tragedy, courage, and hope." She paused, taking a moment to remember the fear in the skid and crush of that broken plane. "I'm your host, MayaChen, and today you'll hear the complete rescue sequence from Flight 742 as it happened, without edits, followed by our guests' reflections on what those moments meant. But first, let me tell you how we got here. For the next 30 minutes, Maya wove together sharp recollections, passengers joking about ski trips, the sudden drop into turbulence, the sight of jagged rock tearing through fuselage, with clips of rotor noise that swelled and receded like a storm. At each poignant beat, she paused the audio. "That deafening whir you hear now," she said, "that was the sound of my entire world shifting on its axis. And here is where I spoke the words no one wanted you to hear." She unmuted the clip. "Promise me I live." The words crackled over headphones, raw and urgent. Listeners responded instantly in the live chat. Hearts and applause emojis, messages of solidarity from as far as Australia, Germany, and Brazil. Some shared their own stories of near-death and the words they'd longed to speak. Maya's eyes misted as she scrolled through the names and flags, so many ordinary people who recognized their own fragility in her plea. After the audio replay, Marcus introduced their first guest, Dr. Elaine Foster. The aviation psychologist spoke about the cognitive science of memory and how uncut recordings help survivors process trauma. Next came Thomas Avery, his voice wavering as he recounted finally hearing his wife's last words in full. "It was both heartbreaking and healing," he said softly. "I felt like I was there with her again. This time, knowing exactly what she wanted me to remember." The final guest was Simone Park, speaking from her home in Seattle. "When I heard Maya's words alongside my husband's in unedited context," she said, "I understood that every syllable matters. No one should get a Cliff Notes version of their own life." As the live stream concluded, Maya felt a quiet pride settle in her chest. "Thank you for listening," she said. "This is only the beginning. We'll keep amplifying these stories until every voice is heard in full." In the days that followed, Voices Uncut climbed podcast charts worldwide. Airlines and media networks approached Maya to consult on new policies for live broadcasts, insisting on real-time audio preservation even under privacy constraints. The FAA issued a directive requiring cockpit and rescue audio archives to be made available, redacted only for sensitive personal data upon request within 48 hours of an incident. Meanwhile, Maya's physical therapy advanced. She took her first unaided steps along the hospital corridor, cheered on by nurses and therapists. Each footfall was a declaration. She lived, and she would keep living on her own terms. One afternoon, Marcus wheeled her out onto the hospital terrace. The mountain vista stretched before them, towering cliffs, shadowed valleys, the distant shimmer of ski lifts. Maya inhaled the cold air, her lungs filling with crisp resolve. "Do you ever think about going back to work?" Marcus asked. Maya's gaze drifted to the horizon. "I will," she said. "But now my work is here, in giving voice to the voiceless. The mountains taught me that even when the world shatters, what we say next can shape everything." Marcus nodded, and together they watched the sun descend, painting the peaks in rose and gold. In that moment, the roar of rotors and the echo of 4 simple words seemed part of a larger symphony, one composed by survivors, stitched with hope, and destined to carry their voices far beyond any hospital room. The first pale light of morning filtered through the hospital's east-facing windows, illuminating the soft dusting of snow on the pines outside. For MayaChen, however, dawn held a different kind of radiance, the relief and anticipation that come after months of clashing with powerful broadcasters and arduous legal battles. Today she would finally leave Breckenridge Regional Hospital, not just as a survivor discharged from care, but as an advocate armed with a mission. Her packed duffel sat by the bed, alongside the worn notebook in which she had chronicled every pitch, every meeting, every sleepless night spent drafting policy proposals for media transparency. A neat stack of thank you letters from survivors' families, printed in bold color on the non-profit Voices Uncut letterhead, lay atop a fresh copy of the FAA's new directive requiring rescue operation audio archives to be publicly accessible. This was the real measure of victory. Tangible change born from her single, desperate plea. Marcus Reyes entered, carrying 2 travel mugs of steaming coffee. He placed one in her trembling hand, the warmth seeping into her palm like a benediction. "Big day," he said softly, offering her a steadying smile. Maya nodded, eyes glistening as she took a careful sip. The liquid was bitter, but grounding. "It's more than that," she whispered. "It's the start of everything I hope to do." But Maya and Marcus had arranged for a brief farewell gathering, deliberately eschewing the flashbulbs and hot lights in favor of an intimate circle of those who had walked the most harrowing miles beside her. Dr. Elaine Foster, Thomas Avery, Simone Park, and even a few of the mountain rescuers who had clambered down the cliff to pry her free from the twisted wreckage. They had assembled on the terrace beneath a canopy of frosted pines, the crisp air alive with expectancy. Thomas clasped Maya's hand, tears shining in his eyes. "I never could have imagined how far your voice would carry," he said, voice shaking. "You've changed more lives than you'll ever know." Simone stepped forward, handing Maya a small, velvet-lined box. Inside lay a polished silver pendant in the shape of a broken rotor blade, mended by two delicate hands, a symbol of rescue, restoration, and collective strength. Maya's breath caught as she lifted the pendant, the weight of it both literal and emblematic. Dr. Foster placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You've given us something priceless, proof that our words can reshape history. Wear this as a reminder that your voice matters." The engine rumbled to life, and the vehicle eased down the snowy driveway, everyone waving until the forest swallowed them in a swirl of white and dark green. Their flight out of Colorado was uneventful, but Maya's mind buzzed with the schedule awaiting her in Seattle. A morning appearance on Sunrise Northwest to discuss Voices Uncut's expansion into global crises, a keynote address at the National Press Forum on Media Ethics, and an evening gala hosted by aviation safety organizations, where she was to receive the inaugural Guardian of Truth award. As the plane ascended over the Rockies, painting the clouds in rose and gold, Maya closed her eyes and replayed the past weeks in her mind. The crash's savage violence, the gasp of her four-word plea on the stretcher, the courtroom victory, and the overwhelming surge of solidarity that had turned silence into a chorus. Each moment was a step in her transformation, from victim to victor, from muted to magnified. Back in Seattle, Maya's arrival at the airport prompted a modest media scrum. She paused to offer brief remarks. "My story isn't exceptional because I survived. It's exceptional because hundreds of thousands refused to let me be silenced. That's the real power. Together, we reclaimed a moment that almost slipped into oblivion. Now we have a duty to protect every voice that follows." That evening, in the grand ballroom of the Seattle Convention Center, Maya took the stage to thunderous applause. The Guardian of Truth award gleamed under spotlights as she accepted it from the FAA administrator, who commended her courage, tenacity, and unwavering commitment to transparency in crisis reporting. As she stepped to the podium, Maya tucked the rotor blade pendant beneath her gown, feeling its reassuring weight. She surveyed the audience, survivors, first responders, journalists, legal advocates, and policymakers, each face illuminated by the glow of shared convictions. "Thank you," Maya began, her voice clear and resonant. "When Flight 742 went down, I spoke 4 words on a stretcher, not knowing if anyone would hear. Today, those words echo in every newsroom, every courthouse, and every heart that believes in the power of truth. But our work is far from over. For too long, crises have been shaped by editors' blades, not survivors' voices. I've seen what it means to be silenced, and I've felt the strength that comes from being heard. Let us now vow that no plea, no whisper, no courageous outcry will ever be edited away again." The room rose in a standing ovation, Maya's eyes filled with tears, not of fear but of triumph and resolve. Later, as she and Marcus walked along the gently lit streets of downtown Seattle, steam rising from sidewalk vents, Maya slipped her hand into his. "We've done something remarkable," she said softly. "But our story, our mission, is just beginning. Marcus nodded, pressing her hand between his. Promise me, he teased. You'll keep speaking. Maya smiled, recalling the exact ebb and flow of the helicopter blades, the fragile heartbeat of her words in the wind. I promise, she said. And in that vow, quiet, unwavering, and deeply human, MayaChen found the next chapter of her life, one guided not by edits or disappearances, but by the unfiltered power of every voice determined to be heard. Spring had barely brushed Seattle's cherry blossoms when MayaChen returned to the sky, this time aboard a quiet commuter jet flying north to Vancouver. The journey wasn't for leisure. She was headed to the annual International Media Transparency Summit, where she would unveil the Uncut reporting charter she'd helped draft, alongside journalists, legal experts, and technologists from 12 countries. As the plane climbed above the pale Pacific waters, Maya gazed out the window, recalling every twist of fate that had led her here. Below, the city's shimmering grid gave way to emerald forests and distant Mount Rainier, its snowcap glowing in the morning light. Maya closed her eyes and felt the familiar hum of the engines, the soft vibration against her brace. Just over a year ago, she'd been a passenger on Flight 742, helpless beneath twisted metal and roaring blades. Now she was an architect of global policy, her voice woven into international guidelines, demanding that every live rescue be archived, unedited, for public accountability. A gentle tap on her shoulder brought her back. Marcus Reyes, seated beside her, produced a slim binder embossed with the summit's insignia. Here, he said, handing it over. Your talking points, bios of the panelists and the draft charter. You'll nail it. Maya opened the binder, her breath catching as she read the title page. The Uncut Reporting Charter, Principles for Transparent Crisis Coverage. Beneath, her name was listed first. Advocate, survivor, host of Voices Uncut. She flipped through the pages, declarations of the public's right to full audio and video records of life and death events, guidelines for preserving privacy without erasing context, mechanisms for global enforcement. She felt a familiar flutter of nerves, ghosts of the stretcher's sway and the rotor's roar, but also a surge of purpose. She remembered the moment she broke the silence on national television, the words that had galvanized 500,000 voices, "Promise me I live." That pledge had transcended a single rescue. It had become an imperative, a call to protect every human voice at its most vulnerable. As the flight attendants dimmed the cabin lights and served coffee, Maya rehearsed her opening lines. They reach into the heart of our shared humanity. She paused to sip her coffee, the bitter warmth grounding her. Across the aisle, Marcus gave her a thumbs up. At Vancouver International, delegates in dark suits and vibrant hijabs, kimonos and kurtas bustled through the glass-flooded concourse. Maya felt both exhilarated and solemn as she passed under banners proclaiming "Truth Unedited, the Future of Journalism." She recalled how, weeks after the live stream of Flight 742, survivors' testimonies had inspired amendments to Europe's broadcast regulations, how activists in Latin America had seized her example to pressure networks for uncut protest footage. The movement was truly global. Moments before her session, Maya took a quiet breath in a side hallway. Dr. Elaine Foster, now seated beside her on the panel, squeezed her hand. "They're ready," Elaine whispered. "You've given them the courage to demand this." Maya nodded, stepping onto the stage under a canopy of light. The audience fell silent as she approached the lectern. Behind her, a giant screen displayed the charter's logo, a microphone unbroken, crimson thread weaving through its grill. She began, "In a world awash with curated realities, we must preserve the moments of crisis in their raw, unfiltered form. For in those moments lie the ultimate test of our collective conscience. Let us commit, here and now, to protect the uncut truth, so that no plea for life will ever again be silenced." Her words resonated beyond the walls of the summit, streaming live to tens of thousands online. By the time she concluded with a reading of her four-word oath, "Promise me I live," delegates rose in an ovation that echoed like thunder. That evening, as Maya and Marcus walked the Vancouver waterfront, lanterns reflecting in the rippling water, she felt the weight of a promise fulfilled and the promise still to come. The charter they'd launched would shape policy in every continent, ensuring that the voice of a single individual in peril could never again be clipped from history. Marcus slipped an arm around her shoulders. "You did it," he said, voice soft. Maya leaned into him, eyes shining. "We did it," she replied, because every step from that stretcher to this day had been carried on a chorus of voices demanding to be heard. And as the lantern lights danced around them, MayaChen knew that her journey, from survivor to global advocate, was more than a story of rescue. It was a living testament to the power of unedited truth and to the promise that every voice, however fragile, can shape the world.